At a number 10 spot, we have the campgrounds. Camping is just one of those things that keeps us connected to nature, except sometimes that connection can be a little too strong. YouTuber MBG Films went out on a camping trip with some friends and began to record their nighttime activities until he discovered something a lot more terrifying.
Well, you've been sharpening it for like 2 hours. You hear something?
Whatever it is in the video, you can all tell that it is walking on all fours and is longer than any human that we know of. As well, the creature appears to be moving very fast, and it only appears for a few frames and then completely vanishes off of it. What do you guys think this is? A lot of people have claimed what we see here is either a deer or a kangaroo, but in my opinion, this looks nothing close to either of those animals. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. At our number 9 spot, we have Not a Mountain Lion. If you live in a rural town surrounded by only mountains and forests, camping can be a pretty nice hobby. For one Reddit user who is one of these types of people, he told a story about a time when he and his friend broke off from their group to camp by a better spot. But it ended up being one of their most traumatic nights they could recall. They only brought one tent for the group, so they built a lean-to against a large boulder in a clearing. As the night went by, one of the two men had an eerie feeling that something was watching them as they heard bushes moving and sticks cracking all around them. At first, they just assumed it was a mountain lion, and for the majority of us, this would have been pretty terrifying. But since this guy was a frequent camper, he already knew how to deal with them, so for him, it wasn't that big of a deal. And to ease their nerves further, they added more logs to the fire. But as they were throwing more logs, the silhouette of a man was seen standing at the edge of a clearing about 80 yards away from them. They were frozen and just couldn't take their eyes off him while he seemingly stared back at them. The man eventually walked off in the opposite direction after a minute or two. While the former Redditor doubts the man had any ill intentions, they held onto their friend's firearm the whole night. They would recall the man disappearing into the darkness of the night, with the Reddit user and his friends staying on constant watch for the remainder of the night. But all in all, this situation just shows how encountering a stranger out camping is much more terrifying than any sort of wildlife. At a number 8 spot, we have the Devil's Tramping Ground. Located in the dense forest of the Harper Crossroad area in Bear Creek, North Carolina, lies a camping ground known as the Devil's Tramping Ground. And I know, the name alone should tell you all about this place. Because in local lore, they suggest this is the location where the devil, quote, tramps, and this has supposedly caused a small circle in the area to become lifeless and never have the ability to grow anything. It seems that locals have even tried to revive the area by planting various seeds and even using a bunch of fertilizers, but nothing seems to be able to fully grow within this circle of land. Some historians believe that this was also an ancient meeting place for the local Native American tribes around the area. They would come here to do ceremonial dances and other festivals, and some say there was some sacrifices done here as well. In the 1930s, newspapers were hit with news that a beast was guarding the grounds. The story read, quote, "Coon and possum hunters and their dogs have been on more than one occasion chased from the vicinity of the Devil's Tramping Ground by a ferocious beast said to resemble a black bear." At our number 7 spot, we have the Ghost of Saline River. The legend of Takaluma, or the Ghost of Saline River, is a frightening tale that has been passed down for generations in Kansas. According to the legend, Takaluma was an old Native American who was condemned to wander the banks of the Saline River after his death. His ghost is said to roam the river at night, searching for his father's skull, who was the chief and was murdered by early settlers. So fast forward, and one night, a cowboy camping on the riverbank had a terrifying encounter with the ghost of Takaluma. The cowboy heard a loud yell and saw the ghost standing in front of him, a powerful looking Indian with piercing eyes and a mocking laugh. Despite trying to defend himself with his revolver, the cowboy's bullets seemed to have no effect on the spirit. Takaluma spoke to the cowboy in English, telling him a story of his people and their journey to the valley where they made their home. Takaluma described a pestilence which decimated the tribe and their wigwams decayed, leaving no trace of their existence. Then he continued on saying that the white man came and disturbed the rest of Takaluma's people with his plow. The ghost asked the cowboy to help right the wrongs that had been done to his people and to find the skull of his father, more importantly. However, some say the cowboy never ended up finding the skull, so Takaluma's spirit is still around the Saline River on cold nights, asking for people to find his father's skull. Number 6, the woman crawling and whispering. During their family camping trips to a state park, a Reddit user by the name of KMI, a official, and their friend had a nightly ritual of exploring the nearby woods and occasionally camping some nights. However, one night they ventured further than usual with flashlights turned off and heard soft whispering behind them. Upon turning their lights on, they didn't see anything, but the whispering continued. As they decided to head back, they saw a lady crawling on the ground whispering random words, covered in dirt and just wearing these really dark clothing. When she realized they saw her, she stood up and claimed to be lost and looking for her campsite. They escorted her back to the campground and discovered that she was just really heavily intoxicated and had just gone lost trying to find a bathroom. In the hump of our list, we have the child demon. As a summer camp counselor in Southern California, Reddit user He Flying Cheese was no stranger to the various animals that roam the woods, from harmless deer and foxes to more dangerous predators like coyotes and mountain lions. One night after putting the kids to bed, the Reddit user was approached by their friend Sadie, who was visibly shaking with a group of teenage girls dressed in black. They claimed to have heard a ghostly voice while on a night hike, prompting the counselor to investigate immediately. As they walk towards the sound, they hear a faint help from a small child. The noise becomes increasingly distorted and then eventually demonic. It almost seems like it's screeching out its best impression of a child's voice. Fearing for their safety, the counselor quickly returned to the safety of the main camp, where they decide not to investigate and just stay safe. Number 4, Boy Scout Lane. This isolated rural street in Linwood, Portage County is said to be one of America's most haunted roads. It's only less than a mile long, but it's notorious for the things that happen on this road. The road gets its name Boy Scout Lane because this is the location where a group of Boy Scouts were murdered on their camping trip during the late 1950s. The case never ended up getting solved, but many people had their own theories. Some believe the murderer was their scoutmaster, while others believed it was the bus driver who drove them to the woods. Regardless of what story is true, what is said is that these Boy Scouts haunt the forest around this stretch of road, and some who drive on this road see 4 distinct lights in the distance, which are supposed to resemble the 4 Boy Scouts looking to get through the forest. But if you decide to be brave enough and camp out there, you will most likely hear the sounds of footsteps and breaking branches coming in all sorts of directions in the middle of the night. And if you don't like camping and you sleep in a car, you may wake up with childlike handprints on your vehicle. So if you can, just try to avoid this street at all costs. Number 3, aliens. Reddit user Dashboard for Fire saw an alien come out of the woods behind their house. They were only 10 years old at the time at the event, playing in the room alone. It was only about 11 p.m. and they had the sliding glass door in the room open with the blinds pulled back. Out of nowhere, the automatic light behind their house just turned on. They looked out of the sliding glass door and saw a figure approach the door. At first, they thought it was their neighbor, but as they looked closer, they realized it had to be something else. It stopped at the sliding glass door and stared into the Reddit user's room. They described it as a dark black figure with a rounded head and stood about 6 feet tall. It was very slender and it stared for a few minutes and then suddenly turned and was gone. Number 2, the Allagash Abduction. The Allagash Abduction is one of the most famous Men in Black cases in history. In 1976, 4 college students from Maine were out camping near Allagash Waterway when they noticed a strange light in the night sky. Initially believing it to be an airplane, the group soon realized that what they were witnessing was something far more mysterious as the light began to move around erratically before eventually disappearing. A few minutes later, the group heard a loud humming sound coming from above and saw 2 bright lights in the sky, and this time they knew it wasn't an airplane. The next thing they remembered was waking up hours later with no recollection of what had happened during those hours. The 4 men reported that their abductors had gray skin with large eyes and bald heads and communicated telepathically with them during their experience. They were taken aboard a UFO where various medical tests were performed on them before being released back to their campsite. Afterwards, the men encountered 2 men in black who warned them not to tell anyone about their experience or else they face serious consequences. At number 1 spot, we have the Wendigo. This was also actually a legend I heard growing up, and they used to tell this around campfires, and it was absolutely terrifying, like keep you at night terrifying. A Wendigo is said to be a very rare demon. They are described as strong monsters that have a very powerful desire to eat and kill their victims, which happen to be us, humans. The legend states that a Wendigo can possess you and turn you into one itself if the person is greedy enough or weak enough and wander in the woods alone at night. And more so when the victims are out camping. There are multiple myths talking about what Wendigos look like, but majority of them describe them to look like an animal, but very tall, with a skull as a head, long legs, and their whole body covered in hair and drenched in blood. They are said to be very fast, with strength like no other, super hearing, amazing sense of smell, and said to walk on water. Like Jesus? So be safe camping this summer, everyone.
Number 10, when the Saints come marching in. The Keesler and his girlfriend were on a road trip through California when they found a relatively empty campsite. They set up camp, made dinner, and went to bed. In the middle of the night, they were awoken by someone whistling outside their tent to the tune of When the Saints Come Marching In. They laid in utter silence, hoping the singing person would go away. But then the whistling turned to chanting. When you sleep here, you disrespect me, and when you disrespect me, you disrespect the US Marines. The Reddit user knew they needed to get out. They quietly climbed from their tent into their truck and drove to a motel in the neighboring town. The next morning, they drove back to the campsite to retrieve their belongings they had left behind. As they were leaving, they paused at a site adjacent to where they had slept, where a family had been staying. The family told the Keesler that the singing had continued for another 2 to 3 hours after they left, and it was one of the creepiest things they'd ever experienced. Number 9, the Florida Keys. Jackman was camping in the Florida Keys near a quarry and an old dump site. One day, someone showed up at their camp and said that they needed to move further from the dump site. He was planning on cleaning up the junk and burning some of the refuse in the area. The user moved, and that night the men started burning. Both parties went about their business. That night, the peaceful camping trip took a turn. They woke to the sound of scratching outside their tent. When they opened their eyes, they found their tent was covered in hundreds of rats. They shook off as many as they could before climbing from the tent. The rats had gone, but the writer was too freaked to go back to sleep. Instead, they started a fire and stayed up for the rest of the night. The next night, the Reddit writer fell asleep hesitantly, but thought it would be okay because the men had finished their burning. Yet again, they woke on the second night to their tent covered in rats. They used the same strategy, shaking the tent until the little critters fell off, then starting a fire. But after this, they'd had enough. They packed up their things and headed back for the highway. As they were walking along the road, they came upon the body of a giant alligator. Suffice it to say, they had their fill of camping in Florida. Number 8, crime scene. Every summer when Camo Panda went to visit their dad, the two would take trips into the mountains. On one trip, however, their experience left them incredibly uneasy. They were hiking down a steep slope when they saw an old rifle sticking from a tree. It looked like the tree had grown around the barrel many years before. They went to get a closer look and found a small cave. Inside, the two found a handful of aged personal belongings that made it seem as though the cave had once been inhabited. There were 3 cans of unopened food, a rusted cast iron pot, an old saddle and a bridle set, and a deteriorated wool blanket. They unrolled the blanket, and here's where things got really freaky. Inside, they found a shirt with holes and blood stains crumpled up. The writer's father estimated the gun they found in the tree to have been from the 1870s, meaning whoever had been shot, and most likely forcefully removed from life, in those woods likely passed away around that same time. Number 7, orbs. TX_ and their family were camping on a lake in central Texas. On the first night, they were playing Pictionary by the campfire when they saw a light fly over by the lake. For a moment, they didn't think much of it, and instead continued the game. Then, another went by at the same speed, following the exact same trajectory as the first. They were reddish-yellow orbs with no sound coming from them. After about 15 of the orbs went by, a faster, smaller, white one came in behind the rest. Then, they were all gone. Not much was said about the event for the rest of the trip, but when they returned home, their mother looked up what the lights could have been. She discovered that people in a town a few miles from where they had been camping also reported seeing the lights. No one had an explanation for what they were. Number 6, the Watcher. The The user Border Trilogy is no stranger when it comes to camping, but when he and his wife wandered off the trail while backpacking in Maine, they had a rather strange encounter. They had prepared to be on the trail for 10 days, and so far hadn't seen another person since first hitting the trail. The couple had hoped not to see anyone else on their trip, so this was perfect. Normally they just sleep under the stars. One night, because it was drizzling, they set up their little tent and climbed inside for the night. Around sunrise the next morning, he crawled from their tent to see a man standing about 30 feet from them, staring. The Reddit user greeted them, but without saying a word, the man turned and disappeared into the woods. The couple were out there for another few days and kept waiting to run into the man again, but never did. That is actually freaky. I just felt like my back shiver. Number 5, the old man. One macabre cat went camping at a summer program when he was just 16. When he went to bed one night, the group stayed awake, chatting in their tent, when they suddenly started to hear heavy breathing nearby. He described the noise sounding like someone had just been sprinting and stopped right outside their tent. Trying to stay calm, he ignores it and keeps chatting. Then they heard, "Please, help me." Everyone in the tent went silent. They heard the questions again. At this point, they were all freaked out. Then one of the braver kids turned on a flashlight and opened the inner flap to see out. They saw a pair of bare, scabbed, and pale legs standing there. It seemed as though the guy had been walking nude through the woods for a while. The man asked for help again, and the boy who opened the tent told the man to keep walking down the trail and he should find a ranger soon. The man responded, No rangers, they keep me here." One of the camp chaperones came out and asked the man a series of questions. The old man didn't answer. Instead, he started sobbing and ran into the woods. Number 4, the mountain lion. Pillow Pants 101 was in Canada climbing with a friend, and they were on their way back to their car with their dog, walking around between them on their leash. Suddenly, it stumbled into his friend, causing him to stumble. The writer turned around and saw a full-grown mountain lion standing about 2 feet behind them. It had just tried to pull the dog off its leash and was now sitting back on its haunches, hissing. The Reddit user froze, but their friend turned around and started running. They yelled for their friend to stop. Running would make the mountain lion want to chase them. Their friend stopped, then turned and ran directly at the cat, screaming and waving his arms. The cat jumped into the woods away from sight. The two started walking faster down the trail, but when they turned around, the mountain lion was right behind them and even closer this time than before. The friends started throwing rocks. One of the rocks landed and rolled past the lion. The animal chased it down the trail until it disappeared. During the last mile or so back to the camp, the two kept checking over their shoulder, but the mountain lion never returned. After they were off the trail, they heard about a couple hikers and their dog who had apparently encountered the same mountain lion. This time the lion had been successful in getting the dog off the leash. Eventually, the Canadian Mounties hunted it down and ended it. Number 3, disappearing ocean. What's Really Going On and their husband were camping in the Everglades in Florida. On the first night, they had the entire island to themselves. They set up camp on the beach, and the view of the wide open Gulf of Mexico was spectacular. The two settled into their tent and fell asleep to the sound of gentle waves hitting the beach. But around 2 in the morning, the Reddit writer woke up and heard nothing. They went out and shone their flashlight out to where the water should have been, but it wasn't there. The beach where the couple had just been fishing a few hours before extended beyond the reach of their flashlight beam. They ventured out but still saw no ocean. They went back into the tent and remembered that right before a tsunami hits, the water recedes. Convinced there was a tsunami approaching, they were terrified. Eventually the sound of the water returned, and the writer couldn't describe the intense relief they felt. Number 2, aliens. Dashboard for Fire saw an alien come out of the woods behind their house. They were 10 years old, playing in their room alone, and it was about 11 p.m. They had the sliding glass door in their room open with the blinds pulled back. Out of nowhere, the automatic light behind their house turned on. They looked out the sliding glass door and saw a figure approach the door. At first they thought it was their neighbor, but as they looked closer, they realized it had to be something else. It stopped at the sliding glass door and stared into the writer's room. Their description says it was dark black with a rounded head and stood at about 6 feet tall. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, and was incredibly thin. After it stared for a few minutes, it suddenly turned and was gone. They yelled for their mom, who, when told the story, didn't believe a word of it. Now at age 23, this Reddit user still gets chills when they think about what they saw that night. And I would too. That sounds terrifying. Number 1, knocking. Snaggy from JOT and their girlfriend were sitting in their car that was parked at a rest area having something to eat after visiting the renowned Mount St. Helens. It was raining, so the windows were fogged, and thanks to the approaching nightfall, it was getting dark. The couple was minding their own business when suddenly there was a series of 3 knocks on the driver's side window. They were both startled. There was no one else in the parking lot. Even more terrifyingly, the driver's side of the car was overlooking an embankment. They rolled down their window and looked out, but saw no one. This was enough to thoroughly creep them out, and they left immediately. Later, they read a park flyer that a man had passed away there during the eruption. Ever since, they've been wondering if the knocks on the car door were that man's ghost, desperately trying to be saved. Number 10, the Men in Black encounter in Roswell, New Mexico. In 1947, a farmer reportedly witnessed a crashed UFO near the town of Roswell and found 3 humanoid figures dressed in black suits surrounding the craft. When he approached them, they simply vanished without a trace. The mysterious encounter in Roswell, New Mexico has become one of the most widely discussed and debated incidents among believers in UFOs. There have been various theories as to who these figures were, with some believing they were extraterrestrials, while others suggest they could have been representatives from a secret government agency or even time travelers. The witnesses described the men as being tall and intimidating, with bald heads and pale skin. They also wore dark sunglasses and gloves, making them appear even more mysterious. While some believe that these men in black may be part of an alien conspiracy to keep humans from discovering their presence on Earth, there's no concrete evidence to support this claim. What makes this particular case so intriguing is the fact that similar encounters with unknown individuals wearing black suits have been reported throughout history in different parts of the world. These stories involve strange events such as being taken for unexplained tests or receiving warnings about speaking publicly about UFOs or other paranormal activity. For example, witnesses have reported seeing a mysterious figure warning them not to speak out about what they saw or heard. As a result, many believe that these men in black are part of a global cover-up of alien activities on Earth. Number 9, the Lubbock Lights case. On August 25th, 1951, several citizens of Lubbock, Texas reported seeing up to 25 glowing objects flying in formation over the city skyline at around 8 p.m. All witnesses reported that 2 mysterious men in black appeared soon after and questioned each one about their experience before departing with no explanation. The Lubbock Lights case is one of the most famous Men in Black encounters of all time. All witnesses described the objects as being shaped like saucers or discs and emitting a bluish-greenish glow. Shortly after the sightings, 2 mysterious figures wearing black suits reportedly appeared and began questioning each witness about their experience before disappearing without a trace. The incident gained national attention when a newspaper reporter wrote an article detailing the accounts of those involved and speculating that they had seen an alien spacecraft. The story was picked up by the national news outlets and sparked much debate among the public. Since then, there has been much speculation over what these men in black may have been. Some believe that it was extraterrestrials. Some think they could be government agents sent to cover up evidence of UFOs or aliens. No definitive answer has ever been found as to their identity or purpose. Number 8, the Puerto Rican MIBs. A group of Puerto Rican teenagers were reportedly harassed by a pair of men in black in 1993. The Puerto Rican MIBs incident has remained a source of fascination and speculation for over 2 decades. In 1993, a group of teenagers from Puerto Rico reported that they were followed by 2 men in black for several days. The MIBs took photographs and asked questions about their experience seeing a UFO in the area. Witnesses described the MIBs as wearing dark suits and driving an old car without license plates. The incident gained widespread attention when it was reported in the media and sparked much speculation over who these mysterious figures may have been. Some believe that they could have been hoaxers or pranksters trying to scare people. In recent years, some researchers have attempted to uncover more information about these MIBs by attempting to locate witnesses who saw them during that time period. However, there has not been substantial evidence found which suggests what these strange figures may have wanted or who they were associated with. Despite the lack of solid evidence, the case of the Puerto Rican men in black still remains one of the most mysterious encounters with this phenomena ever reported. It is yet another example of how little we really know about the world around us and how vast our universe truly is. Number 7, the Battle of Brisbane. During the early 1950s, 2 Australian scientists reported being harassed by 4 men in black who demanded they turn over a computer they had built to analyze flying saucer data. When the MIBs threatened violence, the Australians fought back and scared them off. The Battle of Brisbane is one of the strangest men in black cases to ever occur. Witnesses described the MIBs as wearing black suits and having pale skin, dark facial hair, and no facial features. They reportedly communicated to the scientists in a strange language that sounded like an alien dialect. When the MIBs threatened violence, one of the scientists fought back with a hammer and scared them off. The incident has since become part of UFO folklore and remains a source of fascination for many. Although there is no concrete evidence that proves the Battle of Brisbane actually occurred, the case has caught the attention of UFO researchers and alien enthusiasts for over 60 years. Number 6. The Mori Island Incident. The Mori Island Incident is one of the most famous and mysterious men in black cases ever reported. In 1947, Harold Dahl was fishing near Puget Sound in Washington State when he noticed 6 unusual objects hovering above his boat. At first, he assumed they were aircraft from a nearby military base, but upon closer inspection, they seemed to be something else entirely. The objects then disappeared, and 2 men dressed entirely in black stepped out of the fog and approached Dahl's boat. The men warned him not to tell anyone about his sighting, or else there would be consequences. They reportedly spoke in a strange language that sounded like an alien dialect and had pale skin and no facial features just like the previous ones. After the incident, Dahl went public with his story, which led to widespread media coverage and speculation. Many people believe that the men in black were extraterrestrials sent to protect alien technology from being discovered, while others suggest they could have been hoaxers or pranksters. Number 5. The Flatwoods Monster. The Flatwoods Monster encounter is one of the most famous and perplexing men in black cases ever reported. In 1952, a group of West Virginians were playing in some nearby woods when they noticed a strange metallic figure accompanied by 2 men in black. Witnesses described the figures as wearing black suits. The MIBs then proceeded to threaten the people not to tell anyone what they had seen. Terrified, the people ran back to their homes and told their parents about their incident. In the days following, news spread quickly about the alleged sighting, and people from other towns began to flock to Flatwoods in search of answers. Local law enforcement conducted an investigation into what had happened, but weren't able to find any evidence of extraterrestrial activity. Since then, researchers have speculated as to who these mysterious figures may have been. Some believe it was just some random people trying to scare people away from investigating further. Number 4. The Falcon Lake Incident. The Falcon Lake Incident is one of the most notorious men in black cases in recent history. In 1967, Canadian resident Stefan Michalak was looking for quartz in a remote area near Falcon Lake when he encountered 2 men in black. Michalak claims that he approached the MIBs to ask what they were doing at the lake but received no response. He then noticed a large craft hovering above him which had 2 exhaust pipes on its underside before it suddenly vanished. After this incident, Michalak reported suffering from radiation poisoning, nausea, and burns on his chest, which may have been caused by contact with an alien energy source. In the days following his encounter, Michalak also found strange footprints left behind by the MIBs, as well as metallic debris which seemed to be part of some sort of advanced technology or machinery. Number 3. The Allagash Abduction. In 1976, 4 college students from Maine were out camping near Allagash Waterway when they noticed a strange light in the night sky. Initially believed to be an airplane, the group soon realized that what they were witnessing was something far more mysterious as the light began to move around erratically before eventually disappearing. A few minutes later, the group heard a loud humming sound coming from above and saw 2 bright lights in the sky. This time they knew it wasn't an airplane. The next thing they remembered was waking up hours later with no recollection of what had happened during those hours. The 4 men reported that their abductors had gray skin with large eyes and bald heads and communicated telepathically with them during their experience. They were taken aboard a UFO where various medical tests were performed on them before being released back to their campsite. Afterwards, the men encountered 2 men in black who warned them not to tell anyone about their experience or else face serious consequences. Number 2. The Kecksburg Incident. The Kecksburg Incident is one of the most mysterious and controversial events in modern history. On December 9th, 1965, an object resembling a large bell was seen crashing in Pennsylvania's woods near the town of Kecksburg. Witnesses reported seeing several military vehicles racing to the scene, as well as some mysterious figures dressed entirely in black. The strange object was eventually retrieved by the military, but no explanation was given as to what it could have been. Some witnesses described it as being a large metallic acorn-shaped object with an inscribed symbol on one side resembling the letter O, or U, wrapped around a diamond shape. Others claim to have heard high-pitched sounds coming from it before it was taken by the military. When local residents asked about the incident, they were told that nothing out of the ordinary had happened and that it must have been a weather balloon or a meteorite. However, multiple eyewitness accounts suggest that this is unlikely and that something else may have taken place that day in Kecksburg. Speculation suggests that what crashed near Kecksburg could have been an alien spacecraft or even some sort of advanced secret government project. Number 1, the Toronto encounter. The Toronto encounter is one of the most bizarre and perplexing UFO encounters in recent history. On August 3, 1989, 3 Canadian ufologists, John Venter, Paul Shishis, and Don Ledger, were out on a boat near Lake Ontario when they noticed an abnormally large craft hovering in the night sky above them. It was described as being several hundred feet long, flat black in color, and had no visible windows or doors. The men were immediately overcome with fear, but managed to take some photographs before the craft quickly shot off into the distance. Afterward, they returned to shore only to find 5 mysterious figures dressed entirely in black waiting for them along the beach. They warned them not to tell anything about what they had seen, and this incident has been thoroughly investigated by various researchers and scientists over the years, but still remains unsolved due to the lack of evidence.
At our number 10 spot, we have the 27 Club. This one had to be on this list as it's probably the most well-known legend involving a deal with the devil himself. For those who don't know, this is a supposed curse where musicians and actors alike died at the young age of 27. This is usually from making a deal with the devil that either rewards a person with a life of success, fame, or even wealth. This term originated from musician Robert Johnson, who is said to have met with the devil at the crossroads in exchange for musical talent. Once his soul was given up, Johnson became one of the most popular blues players almost overnight. However, once he turned the ripe age of 27, he tragically passed away, with many claiming that the devil came to finish their deal. This curse became more popular when musicians Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and Brian Jones all passed away at the age of 27 between the years of 1969 all the way to 1971. But then the 27 Club got international attention when Kurt Cobain died at 27 in 1994. The deaths are usually from drug abuse or through darker, violent means, which is why many people attribute it to the devil. Other notable members of the 27 Club include Amy Winehouse, Jonathan Brandis, who was in Stephen King's It, and Kim Jong-hyun, who is a K-pop star. Rest in peace to all these people. At our number 9 spot, we have the Devil's Bible. The Codex Gigas, more commonly known as the Devil's Bible, is a 3 feet tall medieval manuscript that has baffled historians for decades. The story goes that a monk got sentenced to solitary confinement for breaking his religious vows. To avoid punishment, he claimed that he was going to write a book filled with all of the knowledge in the world. But after hours of writing, he found that this was an impossible task and decided to pray to God for divine intervention, hoping to receive all of the knowledge in the world. However, after hours, God didn't seem to answer. So instead, he turned to Satan. Cause why not? Instead of the holiest person, let's just pick the worst guy in the world. And it's said that Satan actually picked up and assisted him in writing this book. What's more surprising is that Satan is believed to have written this book in a single day. And based on modern research, the book shows no signs of hesitation or fatigue. A picture of the devil is also at the front, just in case you guys thought I was lying about the devil stuff. At our number 8 spot, we have the house on Ridge Avenue. In the north side of Pittsburgh lies where it's also known as the house the devil built. The house is actually 1129 Ridge Avenue and known as the Conglier House. It was built in 1860s by Charles Conglier, who lived in the house with his wife Lyda and their maid Essie. The maid and Charles would be having a secret affair, and soon after, the wife overheard what was happening. So she collected a knife and a meat cleaver and proceeded to murder the two. She would be found later humming lullabies as she rocked on her chair. Then in 1900, Dr. Adolf Brunreicher purchased the home. One day, the neighbors heard a woman screaming in the house and called the police. Once the police arrived, the doctor was nowhere to be found, but instead there was only the body of the woman with no head. At our number 7 spot, we have Angelfire.com. This website is all about Satan, demons, and hell. Sounds like a good time. Jokes. This website is pretty dark. The site has all the information needed to know about Satanism. This includes the Aljiwa, aka the Black Book of Satan, rituals committing to Satan, exposing Christianity, and even how to summon demons. To invite Satan inside of you, all you need is 1 or more black candles, a sterilized needle, a piece of clean paper, and a dry pen where you sign your name in blood. First, you need to write this prayer on the card, and for obvious reasons, I will not be saying it. I don't want to get possessed, and thank you very much. Number 6, the Demon Tablet. A tablet made in Babylon around 1500 BC is supposedly the earliest known representation of a demon or a ghost. The clay tablet shows a handcuffed bearded spirit getting guided into the afterlife by a potential lover or a friend. It was originally hard to see any form of drawing on the tablet until researchers put it under a lamp, which clearly illustrated the ghostly depiction. That's not all. There's also a backside. The backside had broken off text that gave instructions how to handle demons and send them back into the underworld. And if that wasn't creepy enough, the final line of the text urges readers to not look behind you. The exact origin of the tablet is unknown, but it's believed to have been stored in a library of magic in the house of an exorcist or in a temple. If this library had books about exorcising demons, imagine all the other things it had. I would love to go there. In the Hump Relics, we have the San Juanico Bridge. When Typhoon Yolanda hit the country of the Philippines and almost erased vast areas in Leyte and Tacloban, the over 40-year San Juanico Bridge remains strong and steady. Impressive, right? Well, what could be said to the secret to its strength? Legends say that the longevity and the strength of the San Juanico Bridge joining the two islands is due to the countless demonic rituals done on the bridge that involved a lot of human sacrifice. Former First Lady Imelda Marcos allegedly had conspired the kidnapping of street kids or random babies from Leyte and Samar, and they offered them in demonic rituals on the bridge, mixing their blood with the concrete. At the time, Imelda headed the construction of the bridge and reportedly performed the sacrifice upon a fortune teller who said children's blood was needed for the project's completion. Bodies of the sacrificed children were then thrown down the bridge, so whenever there are haunting incidents on the bridge, people will remember the story about the unknown children sacrificed there. At number 4 spot, we have the Devil's Road. Back in 2004, Night Shyamalan shot the horror film The Village. They did this all in an open field just north of Delaware, simply because the place was said to be infested with demonic entities and other sorts of apparitions. Rumor has it that a white house hidden in the woods on Devil's Road, officially named Cosart Road, was home to the DuPonts, who was a wealthy family who resorted to inbreeding to keep their fortune within the family. Gross. The cult house was used to perform incestuous marriages and to conceal deformed offspring. The trees in the area have a dramatic bend away from the house, as if they are attempting to flee. Visitors have discovered piles of animal corpses in the area that are said to be used in rituals regarding the devil. Much of the strange activity on Devil's Road can be attributed to the pranksters in their teens, such as the fishing line strung across the road at night heck and other sorts of different things. But you guys be the judge of that in the end of the day. At our number 3 spot, we have the Devil's Tower. This 1,200 feet tall tower of rugged rock is known as the Devil's Tower. It is located in northeast Wyoming, and when you look around the area, there is nothing that even closely resembles this behemoth. It's very unique in nature as it has these grooves around the rock. Although this can be explained by natural phenomena like a form of volcano, Native Americans around the area have a completely different belief. Many claim that back in the day, the natives were being attacked by these gigantic demonic bears. So to defend themselves, they would go up this devil's tower and pray to the Great Spirit to save them. They claim that this is why the tower had grooves, because it was from the bears trying to claw themselves above it. Other theorists believe that it was an ancient tree that was petrified into stone, basically saying that giants lived in the area. But what do you guys think? Is the Devil's Tower a product of large bears, or is it just one of those natural wonders? Let me know in the comment below. Number 2, Annelise Michelle. Couldn't mention devil stories without involving a real-life exorcism. In fact, this is the same case that inspired the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Annelise was a normal girl growing up, but by the time she hit the age of 16, everything 180'd. She began to see the face of the devil everywhere she went, and shortly after, many people, including herself, believed that she was possessed by a real demon. A total of 67 exorcisms were done, and they sounded a little something like this.
Kapiert? Da soll schon etwas zu sagen. Weil der Teufel größere Macht.
Unfortunately, they did nothing for this poor girl, and she ended up passing away from malnourishment and dehydration. Were these the true sounds of a demon or a troubled girl looking for help? Number 1, the Daveless Cave. Many have said this is the place where the devil once hid. Located on Mount Pateli, this cave has been enjoying a notorious reputation since 1800s when reports of paranormal activity first began. Slowly, they would attribute the activity with the native stories, talking about a time when the devil once hid in the cave for survival. Now stories tell of electronics that stopped working, of water which flows the wrong way, and even mysterious disappearances of explorers who enter the cave never to emerge again. Details such as a small handprint near the entrance further shroud the location in complete mystery. It's said that the cave was used by various religious groups or cult practitioners, and whispers of sacrifice and demonic rituals are said to have happened in these very caves. The cave has many different tunnels within, which are all said to lead to an underground water pool, which are all linked to the mischievous god Pam and his nymph. At a number 10 spot, we have the Martyr of Saint Valentine. We couldn't do this video without the inspiration to the holiday, Saint Valentine himself. The legend himself lived during the rule of Emperor Claudius II in Rome around 270 AD, but he unfortunately met the tragic end of being beheaded. So how did this saint end up associating with love? So Emperor Claudius, who was involved in many unpopular and bloody campaigns during his reign, had lots of trouble getting soldiers to join his army because of their strong attachment to their wives and their families. To solve this problem, he decided to ban all marriages and engagements in Rome. Problem solved, right? Well, not really. Valentine, who was a holy priest, defied the emperor's decree and continued to perform marriages for young couples in secret. But when Valentine's actions were eventually discovered, he was arrested and beheaded on February the 14th. Valentine was said to have left a farewell note for the jailer's daughter, who had become his friend, and signed it, quote, "From your Valentine." For his actions, he was named a saint after his death, and ever since, February 14 has been all about love. And if you ever want to give thanks to this man, you can actually see his real skull in Rome. So you can just go there and just say Happy Valentine's Day. I bet he would appreciate it. Number 9, the 1945 bombing of Prague. On Valentine's Day in 1945, the United States Air Force made a tragic mistake that would forever be remembered in Czech history. During World War II, strategic bombing was considered a crucial component of warfare by military theorists who believed it could bring a swift end to the conflict by paralyzing the enemy's will to fight. The British and American Air Forces followed this theory very closely, with thousands of tons of bombs being dropped on German cities at the time. However, on that fateful day in February, a navigational error caused by bad weather led to 62 B-17 flying fortresses to drop 152 tons of bombs on Prague instead of their intended target, Dresden. The raid lasted less than 10 minutes and left 701 people dead and 2,000 homes completely destroyed or damaged. Some of the pilots were aware of their mistake, but were bound by strict orders to maintain radio silence. Other famous buildings such as the Faust House in Charles Square and a Vidaragi synagogue were also damaged in the attack. The bombing of Prague was used for propaganda purposes by both the Germans and the communists at the time. The German propaganda described it as an Anglo-American terrorist raid, while the communist propaganda used it as an anti-American tool. The bombing of Prague remains a painful memory that is remembered every single year, with a Remembrance Act held in honor of the victims. The tragic events of February 14th, 1945 serve as a reminder of the devastating impact that war can have on innocent lives and communities. At our number 8 spot, we have the Stardust nightclub fire. On February 14th, 1981, the Stardust nightclub in Dublin was the site of a devastating tragedy. On this Valentine's Day, 841 people had gathered at the club for a regular disco party, as they thought. But on this lucky night, a fire broke out in the roof space above them. The fire started when the roofing materials melted due to the heat, but the partygoers didn't initially notice the fire because the music was far too loud. When people finally realized what was happening, a panic broke out as soon as they tried to escape. But the emergency exits were padlocked, the windows were sealed, and there was an excessive amount of tables and chairs blocking the way out. Despite the efforts of emergency responders, many of the people inside the club perished due to the smoke and flames. At the time, the fire was ruled as arson, but decades later, the families of the victims were calling for a new inquest as there was a lack of evidence to support the initial arson findings. But on that fateful day, 48 people died and 200 were injured, leaving a lasting impact on the city of Dublin and the families of those affected. At our number 7 spot, we have the Valentines Day Massacre. The years between 1924 and 1930 saw the Windy City transform into one of the largest centers of gang activity in the entire United States. The ratification of the 18th Amendment, which ushered in prohibition, gave rise to bootlegging and presented many gangs with an opportunity to make money and even form connections connections with their cities. Now let's fast forward to the morning of February 14th, 1929, a day that would go down as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Two men dressed as police officers stormed a warehouse in Chicago's north side, where they lined up 7 men in front of a wall as if it was a routine police raid. But this was no ordinary raid. The 2 fake police officers were soon joined by 2 others dressed as civilians, and they all pulled out machine guns and other weapons from their jackets before open firing. In just a matter of minutes, 70 bullets were fired, leaving all 7 men dead or dying on the floor, soaked in their own blood. The warehouse belonged to George Bugs Morin, who was the leader of the North Side Gang, which was a rival to the notorious gangster Al Capone. Morin's gang was the only thing standing in the way of Al Capone's crime syndicate, as it sought to dominate all gang activity in the entire city of Chicago. However, when news of the massacre broke later that day, all suspicions fell immediately on Capone. Frank Hawk Gussenberg, Morin's enforcer, was the only one still alive when law enforcement arrived at the scene, but he refused to reveal anything before he died from his injuries several hours later. Morin himself, who wasn't present at the warehouse at the time, said that only Capone kills like that when he was informed of the incident. It is suspected that Morin was the intended target of the massacre, but he arrived later than the others and fled the scene upon seeing the fake police officers entering the warehouse. Capone himself was in Florida at the time, giving him an ironclad alibi. No one was ever arrested or tried for these crimes due to the lack of concrete evidence, but the massacre was eventually attributed to Capone's gang. The incident effectively diminished Morin's influence in the Chicago gang circuit, leaving Capone to completely dominate the city through his syndicate until he was arrested and convicted of tax evasion in 1931. Number 6, the murder of Jodine Sarin. In the early hours of Valentine's Day in 2007, Art and Lois Sarin visited their daughter Jodine at her condo, only to discover a scene straight out of a nightmare. Jodine, who suffered from mental disabilities, was lying dead on her bed, having been beaten and strangled. What was even more shocking was that the Sarins had actually interrupted the killer in act of having intercourse with their daughter just moments before, having to wait in another room while he quickly dressed and fled. The perpetrator managed to slip away before the couple realized what had happened. The killer was never caught or identified despite the collection of DNA evidence from the crime scene. The brutal murder of Jodine Sarin continues to haunt her parents to this day, as they continue to struggle to come with terms with the loss of her daughter and the cruel and senseless way in which she was taken from them. Overall, this is a crazy tragedy because it went from people thinking that she was in love to people realizing that she was actually dead. In the hump of our list, we have the murder of the Rundle family. In 1985, a Valentine's Day present turned into a horror story. Cassandra Rundle and her 2 children, Detrick and Milani, were found brutally murdered in their home. Cassandra was assaulted, beaten, and strangled to death, while Melanie had a fractured skull and was strangled in her own bedroom. Detrick was found dead with a bloody hockey stick behind him, and the investigation revealed that Detrick had likely returned home while the murders were still in progress. Cassandra had recently placed personal ads in a local newspaper and received over 80 responses from men. Investigators followed up on these leads, but no evidence linked any of the men to the crime. Another suspect was Philip E. Wilkinson, a former soldier on death row for the 1992 triple slaying of a mother and her 2 children. The Rundle murders bore similarities to Wilkinson's case, but he was never connected to the case in the end of the day. The Rundle's family's tragic end remains unsolved for more than 30 years and has been one of Colorado Springs' most notorious crimes, and it definitely scares many people to this day. The community still talks about the case and shares stories, theories, and potential suspects. A local historian has even offered tours of the Rundle family home, which remains vacant and abandoned if you guys want to visit. Unfortunately, the case still remains a mystery and the victim's family has yet to find justice. At number 4 spot, we have the disappearance of Marcy Jo Andrews. On Valentine's Day in 1984, Marcy Jo Andrews, a 24-year-old woman, attended a party with 2 friends in Chicago, and on the way back, the driver, Casey Noaki, crashed into a viaduct, causing Andrews to injure her ankle. Noaki then took Andrews to the hospital in a taxi, while Andrews' friends stayed in Noaki's car waiting for a tow truck. However, when the friends tried to call Noaki's apartment to check up on Andrews, he claimed that she had left and refused to let them in. When the police got involved, Noaki repeated the same story and denied any knowledge of Andrews' whereabouts. 16 years later, in the year 2000, Noaki was charged with Andrews' murder. The prosecution argued that he took Andrew back to his apartment, drugged her with THC, assaulted her, and later murdered her. Several witnesses testified to having seen Andrews in Noaki's apartment, with one witness claiming to have seen Andrews handcuffed to a radiator and then lying dead on the floor. The prosecution also argued that Noaki gave Andrews a THC overdose and disposed of her body. Noaki's defense team countered the prosecution claims, arguing that witnesses were unreliable due to their criminal backgrounds and even offered deals in exchange for their testimony. However, Noki was still convicted of assault and murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. To this day, Andrew's body was never found, and the case remains one of Chicago's most famous unsolved murders, and it's just crazy to think how many tragic events occurred on this lovable day. Number 3, the picnic at Hanging Rock. The story of Picnic at Hanging Rock tells of the mysterious disappearance of schoolgirls Miranda, Marianne, Irma, and their teacher Miss McCraw on Valentine's Day 1900. The legend goes that the schoolgirls were drawn to the rock formation by supernatural forces. They then became dazed and confused and were lost within the boulders and crevices. And this is when they were never heard from again. The story originates from a novel by Joanne Lindsay, who gave ambiguous answers when asked whether the story was fact or fiction. And the hauntingly unnerving film only intensified the legend. To this day, many people believe that disappearances were real, which still lures people to the area, much like the girls are lured to this rock. But be sure to be on the lookout, because if you do decide to visit this area, chances are you're probably gonna run into one of these 4 people. Number 2, the discovery of Julie Valentine. In 1990, Glenn Hayward was on a mission to find wildflowers for his wife for Valentine's Day. As he walked through a field behind a mall in Greenville, South Carolina, he came across a Sears vacuum cleaner box emitting a foul odor. To his horror, he discovered the decomposing body of a newborn infant girl inside of the box. Investigators estimated that the infant had been born healthy and cared for before dying about 2 days after her birth. And this is because traces of food were still found inside of her stomach. Her umbilical cord was still attached and the placenta was also inside of the box. Despite an investigation, authorities were unable to identify the child or determine the cause of the death. The infant was then named Julie Valentine, and the case still remains unsolved. The only lead was a reported sighting of a man inside a red Pontiac Fiero parked at the site 3 days before the infant was found. But it's really unclear if this man had any sort of connection to this case. Until the child's identity can be established, she will forever be known as Julie Valentine. Number 1, the murder of Billy Trimbosh. Valentine's Day can bring love and happiness, but for some people, it can only mean tragic endings. In 1992, Billy and Cindy Trimbosh tied the knot, but their first anniversary ended in Billy's tragic death. His body was found shot by the side of a frontage road far away from their home in Stoneham, Colorado. Oddly enough, the same sheriff who investigated the case happened to drive past the spot where Billy's body was found. The sheriff remembered seeing multiple vehicles there, potentially driving past the killer as they disposed of Billy's body. The investigation led authorities to suspect Cindy Trimbosh, who had collected a $500,000 life insurance policy on her husband's death. Cindy's car was found with physical evidence that suggested Billy's body had been there at some point. This made her the prime suspect in Billy's murder. The cloud of suspicion forced Cindy to move to Butte, Montana with her son James from a previous marriage. Then in April 1994, a Butte newspaper ran an article about Billy Trimbosh's murder, which mentioned Cindy as a suspect. James was teased about this on the school playground by a classmate named Jeremy Bullock. James then responded by pulling out a gun and shooting Jeremy to death. He was sent to a juvenile home for the crime as a result. Cindy died of natural causes in 1996, but rumors continued to spread that she hired someone to carry out Billy's murder. At least one drug dealer reportedly bragged about being involved in the murder. However, the full truth about this case will still remain a mystery. All the way at a number 10 spot, we have the case of Travis Walton. In 1975, Travis Walton was working as a logger in Arizona when he claimed to have been abducted by a UFO. He was with a group of other loggers at the time, and they all witnessed a UFO before it whisked Walton away. After being missing for 5 days, Walton reappeared with a strange story of having been taken aboard the UFO and subjected to a series of medical examinations by these aliens. He claimed he was taken to a somewhat operation room with 3 short bald-headed figures, where he started to panic and fight them off. And this is when a human-looking figure took him to another room, and this is when he passed out and reappeared on a highway completely nude. The incident gained widespread attention and was even investigated by the US Air Force. Many people were skeptical of Walton's story, and some even suggested that he may have fabricated the whole thing. However, the other loggers who were with Walton at the time of the incident all swore that they saw the UFO and that they believed that Walton was telling the truth. The story was later made into a book and film named Fire in the Sky in 1993, so go check it out. And to this day, people are still divided on the truth of Walton's story, and this incident remains one of the most well-known UFO abduction cases in history. At a number 9 spot, we have the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. The Barney and Betty Hill abduction is a well-known case of an alleged extraterrestrial abduction in the United States. The incident took place in September 1961 as Barney and Betty Hill were driving back to Portsmouth, New Hampshire from a vacation. Betty first spotted a bright point of light in the sky that appeared to be moving erratically and growing bigger and brighter. Barney stopped the car for a closer look, and both of them observed an odd-shaped craft with multicolored lights that appeared to be rotating. The Hills claim that the craft descended rapidly towards their vehicle, and Barney even claims to have seen humanoid figures peering out the windows. The Hills reported that the craft approached to within 50 to 80 feet overhead, and Barney ran back to the car in a near hysterical state, claiming that the figures were going to capture them. The couple reported experiencing missing time and later underwent hypnosis to try to recover any lost memories. The incident became widely publicized and was the subject of a best-selling book and a television film. The Hills story has been the subject of much debate and speculation over the years. However, their case will forever remain one of the most well-known UFO abduction cases in the United States. At number 8 spot, we have Antonio Villas-Boas. Antonio Villas-Boas was a Brazilian farmer who claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials in 1957. On October 16, 1957, he was working in his fields when he saw a red star in the sky that approached and became a circular or egg-shaped aerial craft with a rotating cupola. According to his story, he was seized by small, gray-clad humanoids, taken inside the aircraft, and then subjected to a series of procedures including blood sampling, exposure to a gas that made him violently ill, and sexual intercourse with a female humanoid. Boas claimed that he was then given a tour of the ship and watched it take off before returning home to discover that 4 hours had passed. He claimed to have suffered from nausea, weakness, headaches, and skin lesions following the alleged event. Boas later became a lawyer and stuck to the story of his abduction for his entire life. Some people consider his story to be a hoax, although he reportedly maintained his account until his death in 1991. At a number 7 spot, we have the Taylor Incident. The Taylor Incident, also known as the Livingston Incident or the Detchmont Woods Encounter, is an alleged extraterrestrial sighting that occurred in Scotland in 1979. Forester Robert Taylor claimed to have encountered a flying dome, which is this large circular sphere with small propellers in the Detchmont Law Forest. He reported that smaller spheres resembling sea mines had seized him and were trying to drag him in the direction of the large object before he just lost consciousness. When he awoke, the objects were gone and he walked home with torn clothing and grazes on his chin and thighs. The police reported the incident as a criminal assault and doctors treated Taylor's injuries. Ufologists have taken an interest in the story, and Taylor has become well known among UFO enthusiasts as the only person to have reported a UFO sighting that was a subject to a criminal investigation. Ufologist Malcolm Robinson believes the incident could be a genuine case of a UFO encounter, while UFO skeptic Stuart Campbell believes the story could have been a simple explanation and pointed to PVC pipes stored in the clearing that could have caused the ground markings. At a number 6 spot, we have the Pascagoula Abduction. The Pascagoula Abduction was a highly publicized event that took place in October 1973. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were fishing near Pascagoula, Mississippi when they claimed to have been abducted by aliens. They reported seeing 2 flashing blue lights and an oval-shaped object that was approximately 30 to 40 feet in diameter and 8 to 10 feet in height. The 2 men reported being paralyzed while these 3 creatures with slit mouths and crab-like pincers performed an examination on them. After the event, Hickson went on to give interviews and lectures and even appeared on television shows like To Tell the Truth. Parker became involved in the UFO community and even started a company focused on producing TV stories about UFO sightings. However, many skeptics have cast doubt on the validity of the Pascagoula abduction. Philip J. Klass, an aviation journalist and UFO skeptic, found inconsistencies in Hickson's story and concluded that it was all a big hoax. Juanico also expressed skepticism, suggesting that Hickson may have fantasized about the encounter while in a hypnagogic state, which is basically hallucinations that happen while you're sleeping. Parker's corroboration of the tale was seen as a result of suggestibility, as he initially told the police that he had passed out during the incident. No one will really know the truth of this abduction, but it still remains a pioneer in extraterrestrial interactions. In the hump of our list, we have the disappearance of Frederick Valentine. Frederick Valentine was a young Australian pilot who disappeared during a training flight in 1978, and his story has been shrouded in mystery and speculation ever since. On the evening of October 21st, Valentine radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control to report that he was being followed by an aircraft 1,000 feet above him and that his engine was running roughly. He went on to describe the aircraft as not being like anything he had ever seen before, with a shiny metal surface and a green light. His transmission was then interrupted by metallic scraping noises before all contact was lost. A search was then conducted, but no trace of Valentine or his aircraft was ever found. Some have proposed that he staged his own disappearance, while others believe he became disoriented and just crashed into the water, mistaking his own lights for those of another aircraft. The investigation by the Australian Department of Transport was unable to determine determine the cause of his disappearance, but it was presumed fatal. Despite extensive searches and investigations, the fate of Frederick Valentine still remains a mystery, and it really brings in the question of what was really following him in the sky that day. Number 4, a UFO encounter or just sleep paralysis. A now deleted Reddit user was lying in their bed with their girlfriend when they woke up from an intense dream, and as he was about to tell his girlfriend, he realized that he couldn't move a muscle. All of a sudden they heard someone yell out, "Watch out, he's awake," and he began to feel pressure on his chest, all while being tied down to a dentist-like chair. The Reddit user then heard a metal door close loudly and then just complete silence, which seemed to last an eternity. They could hear their girlfriend breathing in her sleep next to them, but were unable to move or even wake her up. This is when the user came up with the idea that they had been abducted by aliens. After a couple of minutes, it had seemed like they were transported back to their bed. After they regained control of their body, the user woke up with their girlfriend and went downstairs, where they had a glass of juice and smoked a cigarette in the garden due to the stress. They took their tablet and researched what they had experienced, and it was either sleep paralysis or an alien abduction. They then left off with a message saying that anyone who have claimed to have been abducted by aliens might have actually just experienced sleep paralysis, and maybe there's some truth to that. Number 3, the UFO encounter of Marios Dewald. The French commune of Quarobo made headlines in September 10, 1954, when a local railway worker named Marios Dewald claimed to have been visited by extraterrestrials. According to reports, Dewald claimed that a cigar-shaped UFO landed near his garden and 2 small creatures in spacesuits resembling dive costumes emerged. The UFO shot a beam of light that paralyzed Dewald, and by the time he recovered, the aliens were already getting ready to leave. Despite an investigation by the authorities that found unusual marks on the railway tracks, there was no concrete evidence of an alien encounter. The story of Marios Dewald's experience with extraterrestrials quickly spread and reached the wine-producing village Châteauneuf-du-Pape, located hundreds of miles from Quarobo. The local mayor and town council were keen to protect their citizens and vineyards from potential alien invaders, and as a result, passed a municipal decree that banned all UFOs from landing, taking off, or flying over the community, which is just very strange. This strange and unique occurrence has become one of France's most fascinating UFO stories. Number 2, The Visitors. Louis Whitley Strieber is an American writer known for his horror novels and non-fiction books exploring paranormal concepts. Strieber claims to have been abducted by non-human entities, which he referred to as visitors, and he even wrote about his experiences in Communion, a non-fiction book that became his bestseller and reached the #1 position on the New York Times bestseller list. Strieber's subsequent books also detail his experiences with the visitors, including Transformation, Breakthrough the Next Step, and Solving the Communion Enigma, What Is to Come. In his writing, Strieber has explored the idea of parallel universes and time travel, and he believes that the human species is being led to a higher level of existence. He has expressed frustration that his experiences have been taken as alien contact, and has reported anomalous childhood experiences and possible early interference by intelligence or military agencies. Despite extensive testing, Strieber's brain was found to be functioning normally. Number 1, Elliot Bud Hopkins. Elliot Bud Hopkins was an American artist, author, and ufologist who is known for his research and writing on the subject of alien abductions. He was a prominent figure in the study of the phenomenon and is often referred to as the father of the abduction movement. Hopkins was inclined to believe that alien abductions were a form of genetic experimentation and likened them to assault. He described victims' experiences as severe and nightmarish and believed that both men and women could be abducted by aliens. Women in particular, according to Hopkins, seem to be part of a highly technological colonization scheme where they've been taken to spaceships, impregnated, and then had their hybrid fetuses removed. Hopkins believes that once a victim, abductees were powerless and susceptible to additional kidnapping. Critics of his work, however, argue that the phenomenon can be explained by normal hallucinatory powers of the brain, such as sleep paralysis. Hopkins rejected this idea and believed that sleep paralysis was an inadequate explanation for those who experience abductions outside of the bedroom.
Number 10, the Russian sleep experiment. In the 1940s, a group of researchers in Soviet Russia conducted an experiment that would become known as the Russia sleep experiment. They wanted to test the effects of sleep deprivation on human beings and created a gas that could keep people awake for days on end. The experiment began with 5 test subjects who were locked in a sealed chamber and exposed to the gas. At first, they were able to stay awake for days, but as time passed, they became more and more agitated and paranoid. They began to have vivid hallucinations and experience extreme paranoia, convinced that their fellow test subjects were conspiring against them. Eventually, they became so delirious that they turned on each other, attacking and ending one another. But even after they had ended each other, the researchers continued to pump the gas into the chamber. They wanted to see how long the human body could survive without sleep, and they were determined to push their tests to the limit. Days turned into weeks, and the remaining test subjects became more and more deranged. They stopped speaking to each other and instead began whispering into the microphones that the researchers had placed in the chamber. The researchers listened in horror as the test subjects spoke of unspeakable horrors and whispered about the terrible things they were seeing. They begged to be released from the chamber, but the researchers refused. Finally, after 15 days of being exposed to the gas, the researchers decided to end the experiment. They opened the chamber and were met with a gruesome sight. The test subjects had mutilated themselves, tearing their flesh and organs apart in a frenzied attempt to escape. Number 9. Ouija board. One Reddit user tells of a story. In high school, my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night, there was no one else home except the 7 of us, and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town, things we never knew or cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had passed away on the property in the 1800s, and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm on the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. It went to yes and then spelled out K-N-O-C-K, knock. Then the planchette stopped moving. We just all stared at it silently, and then there was a rap pap pap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside and there was absolutely no one there. Number 8. Break-ins. This Reddit user depicts the most chilling story. Growing up, my bedroom was the only one that faced the front of the house/street. When I was about 8 or 9, I woke up to my dad calmly but firmly telling me to get up, go to the bathroom, and shut the door. I was annoyed because I was half asleep, but I listened. Apparently, I was more tired than I realized because I fell asleep on the bathroom floor. The next morning, I asked my mom what happened. She seemed oblivious and confused. I looked at my dad and I asked him why he had woken me up. He denied doing it. I was becoming frustrated to the point of tears, but I ultimately let it go. Fast forward to college, I was home one break and I decided to ask again. I had thought of that night on and off for years, and it still bothered me. This time, my dad goes, "Ha, I was wondering if you even remembered that." Turns out that a lot of houses on our block were being vandalized and robbed all those years ago. Someone had broken into my garage and was inside the house. My room was partially over the garage. My dad heard it happen and quietly got me to safety. Police were called and the guy ran. He was never caught. However, my parents didn't want a terrified kid on their hands, so for years they pretended like nothing had ever happened. It wasn't supernatural, but it was unsettling for sure. Number 7. The Monkey's Paw. Mr. and Mrs. White and their grown son Herbert are visited by Sergeant Major Morris, a friend who served with the British Army in India. During dinner, he introduces them to a mummified monkey's paw. An old fakir placed a spell on the paw so that it would grant 3 wishes, but only with hellish consequences as punishment for tampering with fate. Morris, having had a horrible experience using the paw, throws it into the fire, but the skeptical Mr. White retrieves it. Before leaving, Morris warns Mr. White of what might happen should he use the paw. Mr. White hesitates at first, believing that he already had everything he wants. At Herbert's suggestion, Mr. White flippantly wishes for £200, which will enable him to make the final mortgage payment for his house. When he makes his wish, Mr. White suddenly drops the paw in surprise, claiming that it moved and twisted like a snake. The following day, Herbert leaves for work. That night, an employee arrives at the Whites' home, telling them that Herbert had been ended in a terrible machine accident that mutilated his body. The company denies any responsibility for the incident, but declares its intention to make a goodwill payment to the bereaved family. Later that night, there is a knock at the door. As Mrs. White fumbles at the locks in a desperate attempt to open the door, Mr. White becomes terrified and fears that the thing outside is not the son he loved. He makes his third and final wish. The knocking stops, and Miss White opens the door to find that no one is there. Number 6, The Telltale Heart. The Telltale Heart is a short story by American writer Edgar Allan Poe, first published in 1843. It is related by an unnamed narrator who endeavors to convince the reader of the narrator's sanity while simultaneously describing an execution the narrator committed. The victim was an old man with a filmy pale blue vulture eye, as the narrator calls it. The narrator emphasizes the careful calculation of the execution, attempting the perfect crime, complete with dismembering the body in the bathtub and hiding it under the floorboards. Ultimately, the narrator's actions result in hearing a thumping sound, which the narrator interprets as the dead man's beating heart. Number 5, The Crying Woman. Early colonial times provided evidence that the lore is pre-Hispanic, originating in the Central Highlands. However, La Llorona, or the Crying Woman, is most commonly associated with the colonial era and the dynamic between Spanish conquistadors and indigenous women. The most common lore about La Llorona includes her initially being an indigenous woman who executed her own children, which she bore from a wealthy Spaniard after he abandoned her. The villainous qualities of La Llorona, including infanticide and the execution of one's own blood, is assumed to be connected to the narrative surrounding Dona Marina, also known as La Malinche or Maltinzin in her original nomenclature. Today, the lore of La Llorona, or the Crying Woman, is well known in Mexico and the southwestern United States. Even got a movie. Number 4, The Red Ribbon. Bill bought his wife many beautiful dresses and a beautiful diamond necklace for their marriage anniversary. Bill took Sally out to dinner and he thought that this was a great chance to take off her ribbon that she was always wearing around her neck. Well, Sally immediately understood Bill's intentions and asked him not to do so, and then Bill left her ribbon alone. Bill looked at Sally and shook his head with distress. Later that night, Bill could no longer stay in the dark about his wife's little secret, so he decided to slowly untie the ribbon from her neck later that night while Sally was sleeping. Although Bill loved Sally, he decided to find out why Sally had not told him anything all these years about the ribbon that she wore around her neck and never took it off. On the night of their marriage anniversary, Bill slowly walked out of his bed and pinched the ends of the ribbon and slowly began to pull on the ribbon. Zip. The ribbon gave way and immediately Sally's head fell off. Her head rolled on the ground in the moonlight night and a large tear fell from her eye. She said to Bill, "I warned you." Number 3, The Girl in the Mirror. Once upon a time, there was a young girl who loved to look at herself in the mirror. She would spend hours gazing at her reflection, admiring her long, dark hair and bright, sparkling eyes. One night, as the girl was brushing her hair before bed, she noticed something strange in the mirror. There was a figure standing behind her, a ghostly girl with pale skin and dark, sunken eyes. The girl was frightened, but convinced herself it was just an imagination. The next night, the girl saw the figure again, this time closer to her. She tried to run away, but the figure seemed to follow her wherever she went. The girl became more and more scared every night, but she couldn't stop looking in the mirror. As the days went by, the ghostly figure in the mirror began to take over the girl's reflection. She slowly became less and less visible in the mirror, replaced by the ghostly girl. Eventually, the girl was trapped inside the mirror forever, never to be seen or heard from again. From that day on, the ghostly girl haunted the mirror, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to gaze upon her reflection. And so, the legend of the girl in the mirror lived on, a warning to all those who dare to look too deeply into their own reflections. Number 2, Sleepy Hollow. In the quiet town of Sleepy Hollow, a legend loomed that struck fear into the hearts of all who heard it. It was said that every night a headless horseman rode through the town, searching for his lost head, and anyone who crossed his path would never be seen again. The townspeople tried to ignore the legend, but it was always at the back of their minds, lurking like a shadow. Especially for one man, Ichabod Crane, a nervous and superstitious schoolteacher who lived and worked in Sleepy Hollow. One fateful night, after attending a party, Ichabod found himself riding home alone through the dark, eerie woods. Suddenly, he heard the sound of horse hooves behind him. He turned around and saw a headless horseman riding towards him, wielding a sword. Ichabod tried to escape, but the horseman chased him relentlessly, until Ichabod reached the old bridge. As he crossed the bridge, the horseman hurled his head at Ichabod, striking him and knocking him off his horse. The next morning, Ichabod was nowhere to be found, but his hat was discovered beside a shattered pumpkin. Some say he was taken by the headless horseman, others that he fled to another town, afraid to ever return. To this day, the legend of the headless horseman still haunts Sleepy Hollow, and those who dare to ride alone at night risk meeting a fate similar to poor Ichabod. Number 1, The Elevator Game. If you're looking for a thrill, you may have heard of the elevator game. It's a game that takes you to another dimension, but you must follow the rules precisely or you may never return. To start the game, you need to enter an elevator alone and press the buttons in a specific order. The 4th floor, then the 2nd floor, then the 6th floor, then the 2nd floor again, and finally the 10th floor. When you reach the 10th floor, a woman will enter the elevator with you. Do not speak to her or even look at her, as she is not human. If you do, the game will not work and you will be trapped in that dimension forever. Now, press the first button again. If the elevator goes up to the 10th floor again, you have successfully entered the other dimension. But be warned, this is not a place for the faint-hearted. You will be in a world that looks similar to ours but is different in many subtle ways. The air will be thick and heavy and you will feel like you are being watched. You may hear strange noises, see strange figures, or experience a feeling of dread. To return to our world, you must repeat the sequence of button presses in reverse order. If you make a mistake, you will not return to our world, and you may be lost in that dimension forever. Many who have played the elevator game say that it is not worth the risk, and that the feeling of being trapped in another dimension is a terror that no one should ever experience. If you do decide to play the game, just remember to follow the rules specifically, or you may pay a price.